Welcome to Generations, a program for seniors, people who know seniors, or people who someday are going to become seniors. I'm David Lepaco, and I'll be your host for this episode of Generations. And today we have a special topic, and one of our co-hosts is actually going to be a key resource in the discussion of this topic. And that topic involves genealogy and family history. And so we'll get to that in a moment, but first let's get to our other co-hosts, and maybe we could each talk a little bit about what we do know about our genealogy. Since I often have been accused of not answering the questions that I ask on this program, I'll start by
Yes.
saying that I am basically half Finnish and half Russian. My paternal grandparents were from Finland, my maternal grandparents were from Russia, and I think that's a large part of my family history, although the details are a little hard to discern sometimes. But anyway, that's my situation. Michael Rosberg is with us. Mike, how are you doing, and anything you know about your family history?
I'm doing okay. Thank you, David. I believe that I am one half Dutch, one quarter Irish, and one quarter German. I do, in a lot of ways, identify most with the Dutch just on a day-to-day basis, and just think I have kind of a different temperament than people who were Irish and or German. So that's what I
Okay.
think.
All right. Thank you very much. Then we have Candy Pettiford. How are you today, and anything that you know or want to say about your ancestral heritage?
Yes, thank you, David. All is well, doing well. And I do have a few things to say about ancestors. My dad passed the lineage down from his great great grandfather, and they were slaves. So I'll just kind of leave it like that. Slavery was a huge part of my family.
Okay. And as I think we'll get to, that's a very tricky thing to try to work with in terms
Mhm.
of developing a clear family tree
But I have
lineage.
some answers for that.
Yeah. Then we have Rashida Jenkins. How are you today, Rashida? Anything about your family history that you'd like to share?
Well, hello, and I'm well, and I'm not sure as to um, where I'm from. So this is a great episode for me to get some more understanding and some more knowledge.
Yeah. And that's really quite all right. I'm sure that's what our special resource will tell us today, too. And so let's move to Nadia Giordana, who is a regular co-host on this program. But for this edition, she is our specialist. She has her fingers in a lot of things, quite honestly, one of which is genealogical heritage, family history, and that sort of thing. And there's really two dimensions to this. Your family tree, who are your relatives and how far back can you trace those relatives? And then the DNA genetic part, in terms of what percentage of your DNA is associated with a particular group of people. But I think we're going to start with the family tree. And so, Nadia, welcome to our program. Thank you for being a resource on this subject. I think a lot of people are interested, especially later in life, in trying to understand their heritage. And so, what's your heritage? And then what do you want to tell us about the lineage issue of trying to establish a complete and accurate record of your family?
Thank you, Dave. And I'm glad we're doing this subject today because it has been, uh, and I would never call genealogy a hobby. I would call it a passion and a very important thing for families just to know about themselves as much as they can. But a few years back, I had a grandmother who first I'll talk about my heritage. Eastern European is like the DNA part of my heritage. I was born in Gorizia, Italy, but
Mhm.
there's actually more Eastern European because that's more of where my family came from. But also a huge line down my father's lineage through England and the kings and queens and all of that, plus plenty of other types of people also. But it's a fascinating subject to get going in a family, and I was one of the lucky people my grandmother got interested in genealogy before it was kind of a thing. And she literally traveled, I can truthfully say, the world, and went to England, Europe, and of course, all around the United States. This was before computers, and this was before the days of that kind of communication. She did some of it by telephone and by letter, but she went to taking the information that she did have about family members. She went to towns, municipalities, city buildings, and spoke to people, uh, paid for and ordered copies of documents, and built and built and built to get some really extensive genealogy things that she sent to me as a young teenager, and I was fascinated. And in my 30s and 40s and 50s, that's when I got into it myself. Grandma was gone, and I began to take current family and build that into it, hoping that someone now, or in at least a skip generation, no one started yet, to continue on. We have that foundation. But I'd be happy to answer some questions about how someone would get started, whether they have something to start with or zero.
Hmm. Well, before we were recording today, there was a handout that we all received involving ways in which you can try to do this research. And it's a little intimidating to hear you talk about the lengths that you went to in order to gather this information. For those of us who aren't quite as industrious or highly motivated, is there something we can do that's a little bit shorter and easier that would at least get us started on something like this?
Perfect question, because I like to say almost everything is easier these days, but this particular topic is a lot easier in this day and age because we have computers, we have huge databases of lineages online. One of the biggest ones in the world is in Utah, and there are just places you can go and tap into. There are websites, and most of that kind of thing is what I use. One thing to start, if you haven't started, which is really good, other than you probably have stacks of papers and little pieces of things, and this who was born here and who was born there, and all of that material. There are software programs and many different varieties, and websites also that will take what you output from these software programs. So let's start with the software program. If anybody's ever worked in corporate America and you've used a corporate database, it's no more difficult than that. Plugging in information, births, dates, towns, even pictures and images into this database, that when you output these files, they're called GEDCOMs, which is a universal file that will go into almost any website that takes these databases. So a GEDCOM is the output file that you'd want. It's kind of like a PDF. It would compare to a PDF, so that people who have Word and other word processing programs, they turn it into a PDF so everybody can read it. That's what a GEDCOM is. And so you're taking all of that information, and you can some some of the websites have memberships, and they can be worthwhile. I used one for a while, and it doesn't matter what their names are because they're all basically about the same. So you can have a membership which you can get deeper into census records and other records, but almost all of those types of records that my grandmother drove or telephoned or wrote letters to can be accessed and acquired online today. So it's a whole heck of a lot easier to get that information. Then it's your job to plug in the holes.
Okay, questions, comments?
I have a comment. There are certain aspects that you have to send in, like a piece of your hair or some blood, to send in for your DNA and to get some genealogy information. I've often been leery of that because, I don't want to walk around with a clone, someone, looking like me. And what do they do with the things that you send in after they're
Um,
done?
well, that's a good question. The two I knew of was I think there was one called Ancestry and one called 23andMe. And 23andMe has folded, and a lot of people have used it. And there are still some questions about where that DNA material is going.
Mhm.
Personally, I don't worry about that too much, but I never actually thought about the idea of a clone. So that's something to think about when you're sending your DNA somewhere. But we did do that on the show a few years ago. Every one of the co-hosts that were there at the time sent our DNA in a little spit in a tube and looking to see what our base heritage. And that's how I learned that I am less Italian and more Eastern European than I thought I was, and that there was Irish in my bloodline and not all English. And so, but you can also find out, I guess they can actually see Neanderthal in in your DNA, and I don't know how they do that. It's one of the ways we can touch on this now for a moment. It's using that kind of DNA is one of the ways because African Americans don't have, because of the big African Americans, and I don't know how it is in Africa for their lineages, have a big break. Slavery just, it's
Mhm.
like a brick wall
So
for
true.
tracing your heritage. And using DNA, you can determine what area of Africa they may have come from, and a probability, if not for certainness, of potentially what tribe that they may have originated from. What a wonderful thing that is. That opens up a whole new world we didn't have a long time ago. So it does have a lot of value, and if it were me, I wouldn't hesitate to learn that information. I'd want to know.
Well, I wonder if I could ask kind of a dumb question, and that is, do these two or three large sites dedicated to genealogy on the web, do they in some literal sense have the information, like in a digital library, or do they merely route your request to various original sources, libraries, and other computer systems?
Oh, excellent question. Both is true, but the the actual family trees that you can look up and find and connect to your own family tree are all uploaded by the people themselves. They haven't stolen your information. Uh, I uploaded mine to, I think, two different places. geni.com is a wonderful free level place that I use that has all the basics that I need. I took a GEDCOM, then one of those basic documents, and uploaded it, and my family tree is there, and other people can. I think you can make it private if you don't want other people to see it. I want other people to see it, to ask, because you can actually have checks and balances, and they have a joint ancestor. You can correct mistakes that there might be in there. You can see these different things. They're like a flow chart. When you think of a flow chart, it starts at the top, the boss of the company, and then the flow chart goes down. In a GEDCOM, it starts at the bottom. It's the base, the trunk of the tree, you, your family, and branches up and out. So it's no different than that kind of material and information. And then within each one of those boxes, you can go as deep and as far as you want. You can add photographs, you can include documents, you can have text boxes to add anecdotes and stories. So for the person who might just simply be a hobbyist and want the basic information, you can do that. And in mine, for most of them, that's all there is there. But, or you can make it your life's work and have a huge amount of information in there. Any other questions?
So Candy, what's your take on all of this?
Well, I can go on both sides. I'll start with my mother's because it's very short. My mother's family came from Memphis, African American, and there's some Scottish on my mom's side. But as they came from Memphis, he had a very long history of being a masonry. And he learned that during the slavery time of his grandparents. And they brought him to Minnesota to work on the state capitol because there was certain marble that only my grandfather knew because years and years and years of slavery of working on that marble. And so they said, oh, we can work with you, Mr. Bullard. And he said, but I want my name to be on the Capitol. And they said, we've never had a Black person, a person of color. We don't want to do that. And he said, well, then you need to find someone else. And he said, so if you find somebody, oh, but well, wait a minute, Mr. Bullard. There is no one else. You are it. You are the only one that knows how to do this. Well, then you must have my name up there. Well, they put his name up there. And if you see all the other people, they have their name and their picture. My grandfather's picture is not up there. They do not want a person of color to be shown. Now, that's on my mother's side. My dad's side was, there was, back in the time, there was slavery. They were on the auction block. And one slave master, whose name was Whites, he bought the brother to the other brother of my dad's. And then the Blakeys were bought by slave master Blakey. And they split them up, not really seeing them anymore. So when we have found in our ancestries, the Whites and the Blakeys are related. So we try to get together and tell our history of what went on. Very powerful. The story of slavery is powerful, very powerful. Well, so we come from a very powerful people.
Wow, quite a story. Well, Nadia,
Yeah.
let me give you a chance to both brag a little bit and also kind of give us a sense of what's possible. How many separate people are on the family tree that you have developed? And is it on a sheet of paper somewhere with lines and connections and all that sort of thing? How many different individuals have you been able to locate as part of your family tree?
It is both digitally and printed out. And I do have somewhere a book that's literally 8 inches thick of pages and history. Um, it goes back, there's over 1,000, and it's fairly near, but there's over 1,000 human beings way, way, way back on the Scandinavian side. It goes all the way back to when people only had one name, like Sven, Ole, John. And the only time they got surnames was when Sven had a son, and it was Svensson and Olesen and Johnson. And then they started working with that. So it goes back way back that far. And that is in the 3-digit date time period, 800 something, 900 something. So it's like, holy cow. On the English side of that, uh, and it does go all the way back through kings and queens of England. And I had great fun at one point in time telling my daughter that she was see if I can remember, she was a third, one of, I'm sure, hundreds of thousands of 30, a 32nd cousin to the present King of England. And, but so are all of you probably. You might be 36, 31, 30. We're all in about the same range of second cousins that could be and probably are related to someone somewhere of royal or disrepute too. That happens.
Well, I bow down to you, oh great one. I'm speechless. Someone else on this panel is going to have to make the next comment or ask the next
Show
question.
me the money.
I'm blown away by this.
Uh, David, do you have anything about you? Do you have a little some?
I wish I
You know,
did
that
have.
Russian side. That
Yeah,
Russian
I mean,
side.
I know that my maternal grandparents fled Russia because they were Jewish, and their lives were in danger. I know that my paternal family, they emigrated from Finland, but I think they mostly came for a new life and they worked on on the Iron Range, like a lot of people did back in the early 20th century. But I'm embarrassed to say that I don't know very much. Some of my relatives, I have a couple cousins who are much more into it and have had more time for it than I have. So it's one of those things. It's an uncharted territory that hopefully now that I'm mostly retired could spend a little time at.
Well,
Any
you
other
can talk
thoughts
with
here?
them. I think you can talk with them, David, and get that information.
Hmm. Any other questions for Nadia or comments?
Mike, what about a little bit about your history?
Well, one interesting thing about my family, which goes back a generation or two, is that on one side of the family, uh, they were religious, and on the other side, my father's side, they were more skeptical. And so I came down with that as sort of like an issue that I grew up with because of the two sides of my family. So they went from one uncle of mine who was a Jehovah's Witness on the one hand over to somebody who was a skeptic and was a lawyer and corresponded with Clarence Darrow. So, uh, but beyond that, I don't know much of anything.
I hear a lot about German. I've heard, talking with you and knowing you as a friend, Ross Berg sounds kind of more, has a Germanish.
Well, I don't know. I think the names that end with Berg can imply a Jewish
Yes.
uh,
Very true.
lineage. So that's entirely possible that that's
It's
where
true.
that name came from.
Hmm. Well, in our final 3 minutes or so here, I'm wondering, Nadia, is there a place you can recommend, one or two places for our viewers to start? Because I think they could be overwhelmed by the task that you're talking about. But is there one place they should start and then they can work from there? What would be your advice to that total novice?
And is it
They,
free, could you say?
yeah, they can do a couple of things. I think the one place that I've appreciated the most that does start out as a free level, and I have never gone any farther than the free level, is geni.com, and you can create your family tree, create that GEDCOM, take it to a bigger, more well-known website, but I don't see the need. And because I also see that they do have a pro level in their choices now. I've never found a need to use their pro level, but maybe if I were searching census records and things like that at this point, that might be possible. I can do virtually everything. One nice thing I like about it, and maybe they all have it, is I am able to, uh, within that program, send an email, which I did, to a niece of mine and invite them to the family tree and say, you're invited to have access to, here's your name in my family tree. You're invited to have access, start your work, and build your tree off your research. And anyone that's in my tree can either contact me, ask to have access, and even people, which I have had happen, and I have said yes to one or two, who are around the world that have found my family tree on this website and said, we have a joint ancestor. I have information you might want. You have information I want. Might I?
Well, unfortunately, we're out of time now, but I hope somebody in our viewing audience got motivated to do this. I think it's a matter of having the motivation and the skill set. Hopefully, you've provided them with some information to get going on this. And so, thank you all for being part of the panel today. I got more interested in genealogy just from participating in this discussion. And so, go out there and find that family tree. In the meantime, for our viewers, tune in next time when we will have another episode of Generations.